Okay, here we are. We made it to the final uh, lectures of the basic course, Fundamentals of Systemology. And if you're just catching this one, obviously it doesn't affect the people here today. But if you're just catching this one online or something, you want to go back and pick up some of the other lectures we have on this subject. This is the final one covering Fundamentals of Systemology, the textbook, basic course on systemology. And this is where we're going to get into, and I put it up here from the beginning, because I've been promising we're going to get into this for a while. And of course, here we are, systematic processing. Now, there's actually many applications of systemology, and we're not going to go through all of the various ones. Some of those I'll actually leave you to figure on your own. But spiritual ascension, what we're using, the pathway to ascension, spiritual ascension, systematic processing toward defragmentation of the mind system and control of existence and self-determinism from the perspective of the alpha spirit. This is really only one application of our philosophy. And it's important that I state yet again, and I'm sure this has become obvious maybe to some of you throughout the various lectures, that the keyword here is applied. This is an applied philosophy. This isn't, 2,000-year-old Greece, long-bearded, stuffy, intellectual philosophy, such as you would study, in your traditional contemporary college. This is applied. This is something you are doing. This implies actually doing something. And so when we apply our systemology in the way that I've described throughout the various lectures and towards the goal of ascension, spiritual ascension, really systematic processing is what we're talking about. So this is our actual methodology or technique of doing something. And the reason why we have this basic course before we get into the actual standard, or what we call the professional course, the Pathway to Ascension professional course, it's important to go through these various basics, because where I say we're an applied philosophy, a person really can only apply this to the extent that they understand it. And it's only going to be effective to the extent as one can actually understand and apply it. So what we are doing in systematic processing for the purposes of defragmentation of the mind is knowingly, intentionally duplicating the systematic processes that are already a part of the mind system. We didn't actually invent this. We, myself primarily, has spent years observing, recording, codifying what the human minds and individuals and personalities are actually doing. So this is basically a systematic duplication of what is already taking place in the mind, doing it knowingly and under an individual's control. The individual we refer to as a seeker. So the basic goal then, and this was something for your notebooks if you're taking notes, the basic goal then of systematic processing is to knowingly and analytically at the upper level of awareness, not reactively, but analytically, basically duplicate what is automatically or compulsively, or what an individual is already doing unknowingly. Basically to acknowledge that such systematic processes are taking place, and then of course take control of them knowingly, not leaving everything on automatic. So if our systematic processing, when we examine this, if our systematic processing seems like it resembles something else, for example, other practices and so forth, what you would find in ritual or prayer, meditation, even psychotherapy. The actual effective elements of each one of those we have been able to basically tap and structure our practices after. So if our systematic processing that we describe within your textbook and that I'll highlight in this lecture, if it seems to resemble in some ways elements of any of these other things, it's because what we've basically been able to do with our systemology is take the essence of what actually works, the underlying actual effective principle, or that one minute element of what actually works, and I'll tell you what that element is too. It's not any great big secret for us. I'll actually tell you what the single element is. But we've been able to isolate that and use that as our basis of systematic processing without having to concern ourselves with various mythologies, paradigms, other ways of treating things, all the other stuff that you could add to various cultural overtones and themes and so forth, but which we found weren't actually, the element that was effective when it was effective. We weren't saying that every type of prayer, meditation, or ritual type practice was effective, but the element of it that made any part of it at all effective when it was hit on, we were able to isolate. And so that is what we're actually doing with our high power systematic processing. I mean, I speak of this almost in passing or as if it's all tongue in cheek, but this is actually really high power stuff that we're dealing with. And so again, defragmentation, spiritual clearing, these types of things, this is really only one potential use of systematic processing, but it's the one that we're going to focus on. So we'll get into some of the definitions here and just ways of understanding it. These aren't going to be complex words, but again, everything that we treat and everything we handle here systematically is a part of why we call it systemology. If we weren't handling all this systematically and in nice little codified ways, then we wouldn't be doing our job. So all systematic processing, doesn't matter the number of participants involved, and by that really it's either one or two, so there's a lot of variation there. But all systematic processing is really a form of self-processing. So self-processing, at one point back when we were launching this to the public 5 years ago, we had finally emerged from the underground development and started launching the preliminaries 5 years ago. We treated a volume called Crystal Clear as self-processing because an individual could do it alone. They could do it by themselves, as opposed to what we were originally doing. And that's actually an interesting side note too here, if I may for a moment. The practice of this really came about when we were dealing with things at the Mardukite Zooism level, and we were trying to establish a spiritual New Age church, if you will, that incorporated practices and traditions and such from ancient Mesopotamia concerning the Anunnaki and so forth. And what we were also needing, and which coincided with some of my own personal goals stretching back to the 1990s, was a method of ministering for our Mardukite ministers. A method of spiritual advisement and counseling that would be unique to our tradition, or at least applicable to our tradition. Nobody was expecting me necessarily to come up with a brand new one, but what ended up evolving from that was, again, a means of spiritual advisement and counseling. So this was the idea behind this. Originally involved an individual that would study as a minister, and learn these practices as a minister, and then be able to, assist another individual as a form of spiritual advisement or spiritual counseling. And what we were end up finding is that it was going to take a long time to really establish those credentials and that kind of training to really get this going, especially at the level of a pace that we've pretty much been operating at least for the last 5 years. And so self-processing became the answer, of developing a way of applying these practices that an individual could do on their own, almost in workbook style. And so self-processing now, we no longer really use that term to define an individual that's practicing solitarily. So what we do is we refer to them as basically solo. So solo, an individual on their own. And one of the reasons we do this is in contrast to before Systemology Society ended up basically, we didn't really break away from Church of Mardukite Zooism, but it is a completely separate faction, and it's not really connected in terms of something that a participant in one has to be in the other. So we don't use our methodology necessarily in terms of ministering as if it's any type of religious ideal. So when two people are involved, typically one that's a little more skilled or educated in these practices and one that isn't, we refer to it as co-piloted. So when an individual, a seeker, is working alone, we say they're working solo or they're solo piloting. And when they're receiving any kind of direct assistance with systematic processing, we don't mean someone like offering them just some advice or whatnot, because that's really not even what this form of counseling is, or this form of practice. But a person being assisted, we refer to as a co-pilot. And if you are working solitarily, which is what has become kind of the norm among those using systemology materials, then stuff like this basic course, the fundamentals basic course, and the pathway to ascension professional course that comes after it are actually very critical to you and to your development, because as a solo pilot or a solitary practitioner, you're the one actually responsible for all of the education, all of the training involved in this, understanding the theories, the concepts, the principles, and and executing that. In addition, one of the things that we'll get into here in this lecture concerns presence in session, and that's basically the ability to actually be in session, to actually have a systematic processing session, a period of time, a formal session in which the activity is taking place and being handled properly. And in our original version of this, the pilot was the one that was essentially responsible for that. They were the one responsible for the training, both of the education of the materials and also training on how to handle a session. Basically keep an individual's awareness and attention in the session and on the material and on what is taking place. And I'll explain what takes place during a session in this lecture, but basically though, we'll make that our next vocabulary word. So the practice, the activity of using systematic processing by either a solo pilot or a co-piloted session is basically, we're not talking about session like your hour is up, sir type psychotherapy or anything like that. A formal processing session, and that's actually one of the terms we use. A formal session, it's basically the procedures and protocols and steps taken to accomplish a specific systematic process. So this could be 20 minutes, this could be 2 hours or longer. In the case of some of the intensives that have been outlined, they involve taking breaks, but a session is really any specific period of time that's been allocated for this. And as such, we'll go through the steps of it in this lecture, but as such, it is a specific activity that has specific steps and so forth. And again, these are just important things to understand if you are trying to effectively use this the way that is being prescribed. There's, again, other applications, but systematic processing toward ascension, there's specific steps to which to accomplish that. These are not my opinions. For example, if you've done all the steps right to taking a shower, and for whatever reasons you decided not to remove your clothing in the process, and every other step was taken, well, you're going to find yourself in trouble. Or if you do all of the other steps but you don't turn on the water, does an actual shower take place? These are all systematic elements towards a certain process or a certain result that's being expected, and to just tap away at these things haphazardly, this is what the human condition has been doing for thousands of years, playing hit and miss, really making no systematic study of what's happening, just expecting things to happen spontaneously, or doing all kinds of efforts and activities and then never finding any kind of results from them. So the things that are handled, the things that are not handled systematically, things that are not handled, we talked about knowingness, and I believe it was the very first introductory lection. If they're not handled systematically or above the surface as knowingness, then they actually remain in suspension. They hold parts of our attention or awareness, even if it's only on the periphery of our thought or unknowingly altogether. But things that are things that we have already agreed to as being things that are in reality, they don't simply go away or disappear when we're not looking, or just because we decide to withdraw from them. And in fact, it actually seems to operate quite the opposite. They linger, they wait around, albeit below the surface, out of view, until an individual is actually willing to see it as it is. So that's one of the things we do with systematic processing, bringing things up to the surface at the level of knowingness and treating it as it is. And many actual aspects of living the human condition have a tendency to actually keep attention suspended. And most people, they go around daily life performing typical activities, and they think that's the totality of their attention, that they're using the totality of their attention that's available to them, and it's generally not present. So the actual available, to be in session, the actual available, accessible attention awareness that's present, we refer to as presence. And sometimes it'll actually say in your materials like presence in session. And that means applying presence to the session. This is the most critical component of systematic processing above all else. I mean, quite frankly, without presence, there is no systematic processing. And as I told you before, I'd let you in on the secret, this idea of presence is actually the only thing in all of ritual, in all of meditation, in all of any kind of creative visualization exercises, therapies. Presence is the only common denominator of any element of them that actually works or creates a change, has the effect that we're talking about. Many things can create effects or results, but the ones that we're looking for, the ones that generally keep people operating on those modes. They had something click once, they just kind of happened upon something aligned just right once while doing one of these practices, and they've been kind of chasing the dragon, as some of you know what that means, but they've been trying to achieve that again using those same methods without fully understanding what it even was that made it work. And so again, we've isolated it in systematic processing. It's actually presence. So systematic, if you combine all these together, systematic processing, it operates by knowing control of an individual's available, actualized awareness, what's actually available to them at that point, and then increasing it. Both increasing the level of control over that awareness and the available awareness itself. So that's, handling presence in session is the single most important component. We'll find in the pathway to ascension, we've developed and experimented with literally hundreds of different processes, different, things you could do within systematic processing. But as we'll cover within, this final class of the basic course, without getting into the session, without actually getting the session started properly, applying the presence and an individual's, full awareness and all of that, all these steps within that, all of those other methods, all of those other processes, knowing all of those does not make a difference. And so this is one of those critical points. Again, so the fundamentals are not only basic and fundamental in the order in which we're delivering them, and they're studied within New Standard Systemology. They're the most fundamental and critical to making anything of the higher and upper levels and upper grades actually work for us. So handling presence. For a processing session to be effective, seeker can't be, withdrawing their attention, awareness away from the processing session. And that means, handling the distracting, the upsets, problems of daily life. This is a preliminary step, actually. This isn't just, there aren't various processings and levels towards this. Before an individual actually works towards their ascension work, they actually, within a processing session, they have to be in session, and that means being able to focus your attention, your awareness, and in the actual session. So establishing in-session presence, it's not just a preliminary step. It's what makes this entire thing actually effective and possible. And as I say, it's the single component that other traditions and methods have, for probably the most part, accidentally tapped into for any of their actually effective processes or practices, rather. So we really have two things that we're concerned with when a formal session, getting presence in session. We've got two things we're concerned with as components. We could refer to them. This isn't really part of the systemology or the textbook. We have set and setting. And they're just kind of easy to think about this way. We have the preliminaries, mean handling all of this to get a session going. The setting, the environment, the establishing space-time for the session, whether it's indoors or outdoors. Usually, most systematic processing is done indoors. It's because of the objective level of interaction with the environment. It's not necessarily done within an empty room or clearing everything out, and so it shouldn't be done necessarily in an overly cluttered environment. But there's many parts of our practice that require interacting with the physical universe, actually alternating our attention between something internal or something subjective and something objective, which means having various items or furniture, various things around, and of course being comfortable within that environment. And that's part of the set. The individual themselves and the setting around them, the individual's set or mindset. This concept is something that goes back to old New Thought, New Consciousness ideas and whatnot. It's also used in film. as far as the terminology, it's not specific to our systemology in any way. But the individual needs to be comfortable. They need to be perceiving themselves within a safe environment, uninterrupted, and able to provide, of course, presence. And part of that setting cannot include anything that's going to be directly re-stimulative of what is trying to be handled within the session. So, if something's trying to be handled with the session, or even if that particular element isn't trying to be handled with the session, but there's something within the environment that's re-stimulating issues or causing, again, presence to be drawn elsewhere from just being focused on the activity of processing, it has to be handled. This is a preliminary to getting in the session and doing other processes. But the idea of getting into, most people, this type of handling of various upsets and daily problems is actually what most people on the surface are looking for in a lot of their traditional, practices or counselings or prayer or meditation. And so we actually, we do that and then take it a step farther, because all of our additional processing is done in a state that is, in addition to having established this point. So to get in the session, handling upsets, any kind of energetic turbulence that's already present before attempting to resurface or bring anything else, on the line. That's important. So we got presence in session. Another key word here, communication. Communication is a key component of systematic processing. It's also where we pretty much start at level 0 on the pathway to ascension, when we get into that in the next course. And for example, in solo versus co-piloting, it's a matter of communication, but again, being communicated internally. So you have an additional component with an individual that's assisting the person, but ultimately, whether solo or co-pilot, the communication that's taking place is also the way that we describe energy in systemology. Energy is any kind of flow or attention or feedback. All of these concepts, anything involving the zoo line, we talk about relays of energy on the zoo line, various mind systems. This is all communication. It's all basically covered under the guise of communication. And this is a main component of how we handle reality. So most of the stuff that comes up, the types of things that we need to handle to be in session, you're going to find their communication breakdowns or reality breaks, basically unexpected or unwanted interruptions in the flow. We talked about circuits of flow in one of our previous lectures. These are all components of getting in session. So, different processing techniques, of course. We're speaking broadly now as far as general handling of upsets, but there's different processing techniques that will target, along the way, that'll target specific areas of life or livingness. But as a general rule in regard to presence in session, the basic idea, and this, we talked about this in another that word confront. The basic idea is to confront, to come around to the front, or to come around to face or extend a reach towards these things, rather than to avoid or withdraw or intentionally not know. Again, as we've discussed in previous lectures, the kinds of ideas and concepts we've discussed previously, this is where it all comes to a head now. This is where we start putting it into practice, because those things that we have blanked out, or choose not to look at or not to know, they still remain as energetic masses. They're still surrounding or inhibiting our field of awareness, and it's a field that is what we see and also filtering our perceptions. And this is what we're trying to clear or defragment in order to have a self-honest experience of reality.
The Joshua Free Imprint, JFI Publications, in conjunction with Mardukite Academy and the Systemology Society, present the single greatest breakthrough of the 21st century for all humanity, the perfection of a new standard systemology, a complete map for the way out from the bottom to the top, and your key to being an ascended master in this lifetime. Everything you need is contained in 3 progressive, self-guiding courses: the Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course, the Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, and the Keys to the Kingdom Advanced Training Course. And each should be studied and applied in their intended sequence and order as displayed in this video. All 3 courses combined are available as 5 standard hardcover volumes, but also as 33 installments, since each single course lesson is also available individually as a pocket-sized manual. The Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course includes Being More Than Human, Realities in Agreement, Windows to Experience, Ancient Systemology, A History of Systemology, and Systemology Processing. The Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, including processing levels 0 through 6, includes in Volume 1, Increasing Awareness, Thought and Emotion, Clear Communication, Handling Humanity, Free Your Spirit, Escaping Spirit Traps, Eliminating Barriers, and Conquest of Illusion. The Pathway to Ascension Volume 2 includes Confronting the Past, Lifting the Veils, Spiritual Implants, Games and Universes, Spiritual Energy, Spiritual Machinery, The Arcs of Infinity, and Alpha Thought. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 7 in Volume 1 includes The Secret of Universes, Games, Goals, and Purposes, The Jewel of Knowledge, Implanted Universes, and the supplementals Systemology Biofeedback and Systemology Procedures. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 8 in Volume 2 includes Entities and Fragments, Spiritual Perception, Mastering Ascension, Advancing Systemology, and the AT Supplement Systemology Piloting. All titles are available from your favorite bookseller. Explore new standard systemology today, and may you never be the same.